So my name's Garrick Heimbaugh, and I'm the founder of Eco-Stylist. And Eco-Stylist is a curated online marketplace for ethical and sustainable men's clothes. And the reason you might be wondering, like, why am I qualified to talk about greenwashing? It's a good question. So even though obviously we're focused on men's clothes with our marketplace, we use Remake sustainable brand criteria to research brands. So we're researching, all kinds of sustainable brands. And I think we have a unique lens on what it means to be a sustainable brand, because it's kind of hard to determine greenwashing, right, if you can't define first, like, what is sustainable. So kind of like we have a lot of experience researching brands, failing brands, writing about brands that pass or don't pass our criteria. So that's kind of the unique lens I would say that I would bring to this conversation. So I do have a presentation prepared for you on greenwashing. So please, like, ask all the questions, and then when we get to the Q&A, I'll answer all the questions, and we can just do it that way. But I definitely want this to be interactive, so please, just, like, ask away if you have questions. And then the giveaway, of course, will be at the end as well if you're wondering about that. So the giveaway today is sponsored by Nisolo. So just quick shout out to them for doing that, for sponsoring the giveaway here today. They're giving away 2 face masks, which is awesome of them, and they are one of our approved sustainable brands. They're really great. I'll talk about them during the presentation a little bit more about, like, why we consider them a sustainable brand, and as we're chatting about greenwashing. So with that, I'm just going to get started. Okay, so you're here today to chat about greenwashing and how to avoid greenwashing. So with that, let's just get right into it. So what is greenwashing? So greenwashing is when a brand essentially, like, exaggerates their sustainability in order to sell more product. And so they exaggerate their sustainability to sell more product. I want to clarify one thing really quick here. When I talk about greenwashing today, I'm not going to distinguish between greenwashing and ethical washing. I'm going to lump it all together because the definition that we use with Remake's criteria to define sustainable includes ethical. So, like, we don't think a brand can be sustainable, if it's like they've got organic cotton but they don't have an ethical supply chain. I just want to clarify that really quick for the purposes of this chat. We're gonna be lumping those two together. Okay, so big claims with little substance is the next part of what defines greenwashing. So an example of that, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. So H&M launched their Billie Eilish collection. It was in January, and they claimed the collection was 100% sustainable. Right? Obviously, this is, like, a really big claim, so you would expect, like, some evidence. It's like, okay, what makes this 100% sustainable? It turns out there was no evidence. So, like, we did some digging, and, like, 12% of the collection was even attempted to be made with sustainable fabrics, and there was a lot of other problems. So that's a good example there of greenwashing when it comes to big claims with little substance. In terms of exaggerating sustainability, I guess I should give you some examples of that. That would just be like when a brand, exactly those kind of claims where they're like, we're 100% sustainable, and they just don't have anything to back it up. Honestly, like, H&M could be another good example there with their conscious line, because, the Norwegian Consumer Authority called them out and said, like, what's so conscious about this? If you're going to claim it's sustainable, you've got to back that up, which makes sense, right? So, and then the other example that we have here is certifications that make a brand seem more sustainable than they are. So this one's a little more gray, but I'll explain this one. So, and it's a little bit trickier. So, an example of this would be like H&M is a member of the Ethical Trading Initiative, right? Which is great on the one hand, but on the other hand, like, they might leverage that certification to make it seem like they're an ethical brand, but then, like, when it comes to paying living wages, they're deathly silent. So that would be an example of using a certification to greenwash. It's like the certification is a good thing, but also, like, they might, leverage that in a wrong way. Another example of this would be B Corps, honestly. B Corps is a great certification, don't get me wrong. I'll explain what I mean here. What I mean, though, is, like, some brands will simply, because they're a B Corps, they'll kind of, like, stop there. It's like, we don't need to explain that we're ethical because we're a B Corps. And that can be problematic. We wrote an article recently about Allbirds where we just noticed, like, they don't talk about their manufacturing side or their people at all, but they're a B Corps, so that's an example where, like, a certification might not be enough, There's perfect counterexamples to that, like United by Blue, Patagonia, and Nisolo, all B Corps, and they all don't stop there. They've all got transparency in their manufacturing, they've all like Nisolo has their publishing their lowest wage challenge, which is really awesome. There's a great leadership position to say like, hey, we're going to publish our lowest wage, so you should as well, and they actually do that. So that's a good example where it's like they're a B Corp, but they go above and beyond that. So yeah, what makes a brand sustainable, right? Because if we're going to talk about greenwashing, like yeah, obviously like you need what's sustainable then. So in our definition of sustainable, like I said, using Remake's sustainable brand criteria, is that a brand needs to be focused on people and the planet, right? It's not just one or the other. And the way that we do it is we have a formal brand evaluation where it's like we're trying to determine if a brand is doing enough, because there's a variety of things they could be doing. So it's like, are more than 50% of their fabrics sustainably sourced? Do they have initiatives focused on circularity, right? Like, do they have initiatives to reduce their CO2, their waste, like water savings? And then on the people side, do they have certifications? And obviously, what do those certifications mean? You know, like fair trade and you know, SE 8000 or like RAP, not the same thing. So we take that into account when we're evaluating a brand. Do they pay living wages? Do they invest in worker well-being? So we're kind of like, and obviously brands, they fall on the spectrum. So we're looking for like, are they doing enough of those things cumulatively that we consider them a sustainable brand? So that's how we define a sustainable brand. Let's jump into it. So big environmental commitments. So what we mean here is like things that you can actually believe in, you know? So like I said, like if a brand's like, we're going to start using organic cotton, you're like, okay, but like how much of your collection are you going to use organic cotton in? You know, if a brand is like, we've achieved 99% organic cotton, or if they're like, you know what, we're going to use organic cotton and if like hemp and linen and tencel, and it's more than 50% of our total, then yeah. So like that's the kind of thing where you can believe it, you know, or it's like we're investing in taking back, repairing, and reselling our clothes. It's a strong commitment to circularity. So yeah, so just like, you know, a commitment that's really like, that's big. Ethical manufacturing, as I mentioned, we're including ethical in the definition of sustainable. So yeah, so do they have certifications? In lieu of certifications, do they actually just publish their wages? Because just to be clear, like we've approved brands that don't have certifications because they publish their wages and they're transparent. So yeah, certifications aren't necessarily necessary. They just can often make the job easier there. And then transparency plus. So what do I mean by the plus sign? Okay, so transparency, I'm sure you all know what transparency is. It's when a brand, you know, is when they share their supply chain. So like, these are our factories. You know, this is where we source the fabrics. So obviously there's levels of transparency. You know, it's like, this is where we dye the fabrics. They can kind of take it further and further in the levels. And when I say transparency plus, I mean, don't stop there. You know, it's like transparency is great, but it's only part of the story. You know, like you could be completely transparent, but then make like no commitment to living wages, that sort of thing. And so then it's like, okay, the buck can't stop at transparency, but it's an essential part of what makes a brand sustainable. So so we're gonna move on next to red flags to look out for. So how can you know when a brand is greenwashing? So step one is no sustainability page. So yeah, if a brand is claiming to be sustainable or ethical, this is pretty much 100% of the time they should have a sustainability page, right? At the very least. It doesn't mean it's going to be good. You know, some brands have sustainability pages. I'll give you a non-fashion example. Like I think it's either like Dow Chemical or like DuPont has a sustainability page, but their page like frustratingly says nothing. So it's just like a bunch of words that don't mean anything. So that's the perfect example of like what a sustainability page should not be. It should like clearly define what they're actually doing. And so yeah, so that's a red flag to look for, is like they should have one. The next one is vague claims without supporting evidence. So we kind of talked about this. It's like, you know, honestly, we wrote an article about Everlane as well, which I know it's been pretty controversial in sustainable fashion. So yeah, this would be a good example though. You know, they claim like radical transparency, but then if you actually look at brands that are transparent, the transparency is not that radical. Like it kind of falls a little bit short of that claim. You know, because yeah, I could name a lot of brands that are more transparent, and also go that extra step where it's like they're actually committing to paying living wages and they're giving evidence of that. So yeah, so that would be an example there. So the last one is trusted failed reviews. So yeah, so if you want to know how to look for greenwashing, just like search for the brand on Google, like search for like, you know, is Everlane sustainable? Everlane greenwashing? Like H&M sustainable? Is H&M greenwashing? Like find reviews, and if there's people out there that are saying they're not, that's obviously an easy way. You can check out those reviews. It's like, did Eco-Stylist write about them? Did Good on You write about them? Did Eco-Cult write about them? So yeah, so just that's a great way to know whether or not a brand is greenwashing. So that is all I have prepared for you there on the presentation. So yeah, let's jump into the Q&A. So what questions do you all have? And wow, thanks so much everybody for joining. So why is greenwashing still legal is one of the questions. Yeah, that's a really good question. The fashion industry that's really good. I don't have like a strong answer for that because in terms of regulation, the fashion industry is still, I think, as many of us know, it's way behind. So it's not regulated by governments really at all. So really that's why consumers are so active. Like honestly, right now consumers are leading this space in terms of like calling for more ethics and sustainability and transparency, and brands are rising to the call, and they're doing that, and brands are being born for that purpose. But right now government is far behind. Government regulation is proven to be an effective way to make industries more sustainable, right? There's plenty of research that shows government regulation can make industries sustainable, but sadly it's just not there in the fashion industry right now. So I agree with you there though. Probably shouldn't be legal. Can fashion influencers be greenwashing is another question. That's really good. I think for sure. Because you definitely have to look out for what somebody's motives are, or do they, not what their motives are, but like what's their research? Like what's their criteria is really what I mean to say. What is somebody's criteria for determining a brand is sustainable, right? If somebody wants to push sustainable fashion because they believe in it, but they're willing to like promote any brand that sponsors them or that sends them clothes, then maybe their heart's in the right place, but obviously you would want to know, if you care about, being more sustainable, you might want to recognize that, like that maybe they don't have a formal criteria or something they go by, like maybe they're not using, Remake, or they're not referencing like Eco-Stylist brands or Good on You or something, right? So then it's like, okay, well, what are they referencing? They might have their own criteria, and it might be great, but if not, just be cautious, because yeah, influencers can definitely, they can be, just recognize that they might be doing something, more for the financial gain without really having like, rules to determine that brand is sustainable. So then it's not that valuable to you. I'll even go beyond that to say like some good examples of this is also media. Like USA Today and New York Post are notorious for posting articles about sustainable fashion where they have no criteria to determine the brands are sustainable, and they just like full of affiliate links. So affiliate links are not bad, to be clear, right? Like there's plenty of if somebody has criteria, it could be a legitimate way to try to stay in business, to pay their writers, right, while supporting sustainable brands. But if they have no criteria, then their motive is just money, more or less. Okay. What are some certifications to look out for is another question on here. So, so that's great. So there's honestly, like, I would start with the holistic ones that are going to make your job easier, as a consumer, from a consumer perspective. So like, looking at sources like Good on You, like Remake, like Eco-Stylist, where we've got approved brands that have been vetted through a criteria, that's going to be the easiest level of certification, because these certifications have taken into account all of the other certifications, if that makes sense. Like when we research brands, we look at GOTS, we look at Fairtrade, SA 8000, we look at all of it. It's like, are brands 1% for the planet members? Are they B Corps? Like all of this comes into account, right? If you just want to look at the individual certifications, it can be a bit trickier, but I would say we just wrote an article on this at eco-stylist.com if you want to check that out. We have a takeaway for each certification where it's like, what does the certification mean? Here's what you can infer from it. There's also some other guides out there to certifications if you want to check those out as well. So let's go some more questions here. So are the sustainable capsule collections of fast fashion brands real? From Sarah here. So yeah, great question. That is definitely a gray area, because like, yeah, so I think I see what you're saying. Like, if a fast fashion brand has a sustainable collection, the collection might be made more ethically and sustainably, but then it's kind of up to your call whether or not you want to support that brand. And that is, I've heard arguments both ways, and so I understand that that's really a consumer decision, because it's like, on the one hand, you might want to support H&M becoming more sustainable, right? On the other hand, you might not want to give any money to H&M because like overall their brand is not very sustainable. So it kind of goes both ways. I will say there are no fast fashion brands that have sustainable collections that pass our criteria. So from my perspective, like none of them are good enough from a sustainability perspective. Like they're not committed enough to using sustainable fabrics. They're not committed. Like I don't see evidence of living wages. So yeah. So I mean, I hope I'm proven wrong at some point. Like I hope they get a little more progressive. But that's what I've seen. Are there standards of sustainability brands can measure themselves against? Are they measured? Yeah, that's great. I mean, absolutely. If a brand, there are tools for brands out there, like like the Higg Index, that are specifically designed for brands. But I would honestly, I would not necessarily recommend those tools because they don't have a consumer-facing application. In other words, like knowing that a brand like used the Higg Index doesn't really mean anything to a consumer. It's like a self-evaluation tool, and like from a consumer perspective, it's like, okay, but what does it mean? And you've got to see that evaluation. It's a self-evaluation anyway. So I would say that brands should look at Remake's criteria. They should look at the criteria that we're using, or they should look at like good on use evaluation tool and say like, okay, this is a consumer-facing tool that's trying to help consumers find sustainable brands. And so I can use this to benchmark like what makes me sustainable, like what are the boxes I need to check, because a lot can go into it. It's like brands get points for on our criteria. Brands get points for things like even like sustainable packaging, right? Like a lot of things they get points for. And so it could definitely be like a checklist for a brand to say like, okay, we're doing this and this, but if we want to be a little more sustainable, we could like, maybe we haven't addressed our packaging yet, we could address that. So yeah, great question. What can we do to help call out brands that are greenwashing? So you can share them. Honestly, sharing is like huge. Because that collection I mentioned earlier, the H&M collection, the Billie Eilish collection that H&M dropped, they made this wild claim about it being super sustainable. Like 5 major sources of press immediately like copied and pasted that press release, and I think that puts consumers at a disadvantage because you have all these people out there being like, it's sustainable, so I think we also need people being like, it's not. And if you see somebody like sharing a resource that debunks something and that's helpful, like you haven't, it's share it, like just get the word out, because we definitely need, people that are exposing greenwashing aren't the ones with all the money, so they're not like, so their reach is going to be limited without your help. So I would say like if you see a review and you want to help debunk some greenwashing, like please share it on your social media. That would be really helpful for getting the word out. So Shreddy has a question here. How is it legal for brands to have underpaid garment workers working in horrible conditions? You're doing a fab job with it. Thank you. Great question. I mean, I agree. Like it seems like something that shouldn't be legal. And again, it's, it comes back to that, like, the government regulation is very loose when it comes to this. And, even in places that are more progressive on sustainable fashion legislation, like the UK, for example, right, where they were trying to get some laws passed, and then even they, ran into trouble. So it's just not easy at this point in time it hasn't happened yet, basically. Like, we need more regulation being passed. Like, I know there's something in LA right now where they're trying to get some legislation passed, because even, that's what I mean, like, even in the US, like, even in LA, you find people being underpaid in garment factories. So it's a big issue and it needs more government regulation. And so, so in the meantime, the best thing you can do to be a conscious consumer is look for evidence of like certifications, like a stamp of approval from like Eco-Stylist, Remake, Good on You, that says they're paying people fairly, because for now that's what we've got. Okay, what other questions we got here? So, tips on becoming the most effective activist for sustainable fashion and sharing information with others. I love that question. I mean, honestly, you can be, if you're not a Remake ambassador and that's something you're interested in, like, apply. Remake has, anybody can become a Remake ambassador, and then you're essentially like, you become an activist for sustainable fashion. You're part of their community calls, You can share their content, which I mean their content's incredible. Like they pushed this pay up, they created and pushed the pay up campaign, which has driven billions of dollars of garment worker salaries that were canceled. So this was like clothes were already made in countries like Bangladesh, right? And brands said like, you know what, because of COVID-19 and we're going to under financial hardship, we don't need to pay. And then Remake's petition really led the charge, and like so far billions of dollars have been recommitted to those workers from brands committing to pay up. So that's just one example, but I would honestly like not to. I mean, obviously I'm a Remake ambassador too, but I don't like I don't get paid for that, so it's not like I'm it's I'm just saying it's a great way to be a fashion activist. You could also honestly also just follow like Sustainable Fashion Forum, puts out great information. Follow them and share what they post. Also, yeah, I mean, just be engaged on social media. Honestly, is a great way to do it. Yeah, great question. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, is there any way, other than stop supporting them, we could encourage brands to go more sustainable? Love that question too. So yes, absolutely. You can reach out to the brands. So if you like, I mentioned this in our Allbirds article especially because like Allbirds is a brand that is doing a lot of things well from an environmental perspective, and then it's just like, hey guys, why aren't you transparent about your manufacturing? So we put a call to action at the end of that article where it's like, do you love Allbirds? Like, hit them up on email, like, call them. They have a number, like, but obviously some people might not want to call, so you can email them, you can just tag them on social media, you can tweet them, like whatever, like, like message them on Instagram and just ask, like, just be like, hey, I love your brand, but like, I would like to see evidence that I would like to see factory certifications. I'd like to see evidence that you pay living wages. Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't have to be like confrontational. You can just be like, you tell them that's what you want to see. There was a really good podcast about this actually. I believe it was the co-founder of Fashion Revolution, said that when a brand hears from one person like you, so you might think like, why do they care? I'm one person. When a brand hears from one person like you, they assume that you're 10,000 people because you're the one person that reached out, and they believe, like, I don't know where they got this data, but I guess they've implied from the way that these things have gone, like with activists and activism, like brands imply that means there's 9,999 other people that feel the same way you do, but just didn't reach out. So absolutely, like, yeah. And even like, if you like H&M, too, like if you're like, I really wish I could buy their clothes, but they're just not as sustainable as I want. Message them and be like, hey guys, I wish you would do more. I wish you would do something specific, yeah, love that question. Okay. So I think I've gotten through all the questions here. Is there anything else? If you guys have any more questions, we'll move on to the giveaway if there's no more questions. But if you have any more questions and you want me to answer them, pop them in here really quick. Okay, I see one more. What about small brands that don't have certifications? Yes. So we have approved with Remake's criteria brands that don't have certifications. So and like, because certifications can be expensive, to be clear. I've heard this feedback from brands. This is 100% true that they can be, especially for. Wow. Thank you everybody for tuning in, by the way. So certifications can be expensive though for a small brand. So, and if a brand is vertically integrated, meaning they own their own factory, then like they're not sourcing from a factory that's fair trade certified, which that would actually be easier in that case to have certifications, like would be a simply sourced from a certified factory. But when you have your own factory, the burden of that expense is on you. And if you're just starting, like you're starting to stay in business while being ethical and sustainable, right? So Adelante Shoe Company would be a great example of a brand that passes our criteria, has no certifications, and the reason they've been able to do that is because like they're so transparent. Like they publish their wages, so they pay a living wage. They measure it themselves, because that's another thing. People are like, "What is a living wage?" There's not an agreed upon definition of that. They've defined it. They share what that is. It's more than double the average wage in Guatemala where they make their shoes. They publish. I know they're a small brand, so they might not have sustainability reports every year, but when they do publish them, they're incredible. It's like you can see like the quality of the quality of life of their workers, and they measure how it's improving year over year. So they're not just like, hey, we're awesome. They're like, hey, like 20% more of our workers can like fully afford education for all of their children this year over last year, right? So they're benchmarking themselves and making sure that the quality of life of their workers is good. So yeah, so really that's the answer. It's like if you don't have certifications, a brand can just be transparent, honestly, and really make up for what we're looking for from certifications. So, okay, so I think that's all the questions. So I'm gonna move on to the giveaway, unless you have anything else. If anything else, just like I said, pop it in the questions. But yeah, so really quick before we announce the winners of the giveaway. So Nisolo sponsor. Just remind you again, Nisolo sponsor our live today by giving 2 masks to give away. And so Nisolo, as I mentioned, it's a great brand. You know, they're a B Corp, but they go above and beyond that by sharing that they ethically make their shoes in Peru and Mexico. They started the lowest wage challenge. They published their lowest wage, which is really great because it's like, if you want to know if you're paying people fairly, it's like, what's your lowest wage? Because that's really what should be the benchmark, right? And then you improve from there, you know, so that you ensure that like everybody in your supply chain is being paid fairly. So great brand. They have an ethical mask marketplace now, you know, since COVID, and so you can get sustainably made masks there. And so we're giving away 2 of them. And we'll be doing that in a second. So yeah, just wanted to quickly. A lot of you probably know Nisolo, but just wanted to give in case you didn't, want to give them a shout out. So here are the winners of the giveaway. So congratulations to you all, and we'll follow up with you after the live, and you know, so you can get the masks that you won. But yeah, congratulations. And yeah, I guess we will wrap it up here in a second, because that kind of concludes everything that I was going to talk about today regarding greenwashing. Well, I think that's everything. So yeah, thanks so much everybody for tuning in. I hope this conversation about greenwashing was helpful. Again, if for anybody that's new here, I'm Garrick. I am the founder of Eco-Stylist, and I'll be taking over Style Sustainable right now for this Instagram Live. And yeah, we curate stylish and ethical men's clothing using Remake sustainable brand criteria for all of our research. So yeah, I enjoyed chatting with greenwashing with you all, and yeah, thanks for tuning in.